if I live 100 years, I'll just never, ever be able to tell the story the way it really happened. These young kids who, you just run up to them, and when we were all boxed in, they were all around, and they were all over our perimeter, and we're throwing grenades, and I got pretty close, and just run up to one of these kids and say, Marine, we're going to get out of here, aren't we? And the kid look up to you and say, you're damn right we are, Skipper.
My name is John McInerney, and I was a corporal in the United States Marine Corps, and I was a member of the 1st Battalion, 3rd Marine Regiment in South Vietnam in 1967, 1968. When I joined the Marines, I was 18 years old. I had just graduated high school in 1966, and that's when I went in. So I walked up the street to the Marine recruiter, and I asked him, how quick can you get me away from home? Because that's what I was looking to do, is just get away. And he said, we can have you out of here next week. So that was my great decision to go in the Marine Corps. When I first went in the Marine Corps, I was sent to Cuba. I actually stood on the fence for 6 months guarding the base at Guantanamo, the naval base. And I didn't go to Vietnam right away. And then I came back with that unit to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And then we got individual orders to Vietnam. So you actually went to Vietnam individually. You actually didn't get orders for Vietnam. In the Marine Corps, you got orders to what was called Western Pacific. Nobody went to Vietnam. Everybody went Western Pacific. So you got Westpac orders, and you went on your own. I was an infantryman anyway, so I was assigned to an infantry battalion. I was assigned to the 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines, which was in what they call the I Corps, or the 1st Corps, the first area of Vietnam, of South Vietnam. It was called Quang Tri by the Vietnamese, but by the United States military, it was called the 1st Corps. And the 1st Corps, written in Roman numerals, looks like an I. So we were called I Corps. And there was 2 Corps, 3 Corps, but ours was I Corps because of the Roman numeral I, meaning the first. When I first got to Vietnam, I got off a C-130, and they put us on another aircraft to a base called Dong Ha, which was a very forward base in the I Corps area. And we spent the night there, and the next morning we were getting picked up by a helicopter. There was a group of us, probably about a dozen guys. And we had no weapons. All we had was our sea bags, our duffel bags. And helicopters flew in line, to pick us up. And those helicopters were just bringing in dead and wounded from a battle that was going on a few miles from us called Operation Hickory in the DMZ. And we were standing on that flight line as they carried these guys off in ponchos. And I never forgot that sight my entire life. With the experience I even had in the Marine Corps, I really was not in touch with how horrible this could be until I saw that. And they walked past, and there was actually blood dripping out of the ponchos onto the deck. And you could see the boots sticking out of the bottom. And I realized that these were real guys. And that kind of really snapped me awake. The chaos of war where I was in Vietnam was an everyday thing. Northern I Corps was where the DMZ was. It was where famous places like Can Thien, Khe Sanh, and it was chaotic. We faced North Vietnamese regulars on a day-to-day basis. There was really not many Viet Cong, and if there were, they were mixed in with the North Vietnamese. But these were North Vietnamese regulars, and we knew where they were, and we knew where they were coming from. The most difficult experience I had in Vietnam was after I had been there about 10.5 months. I was in a scrape called the Battle of Dai Do. Today, historically, it's called the Battle of Dong Ha, because the objective of the North Vietnamese was to take the base at Dong Ha, which was 3rd Marine Division headquarters. And the entire division of North Vietnamese was stopped by 1 battalion, which was the 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, We had been attached to 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines just for this fight. And I don't think anybody actually knew how many enemy troops were in this area. And it turns out today, from books I read, there was about 8,000 of them. And we were 800. So you could see the comparison of the odds we were against. And we were thrown right into that mix. And that went on for days. I, however, was wounded the second day of that battle and was taken out. But that was the worst experience, not only in Vietnam, but that was the worst day of my entire life. I was wounded by what they call an RPG. They're still in use today. You see them on TV all the time in the war in the Middle East. They fired an RPG at us, and I was too close, and I got clipped by some shrapnel from it. Your opinion of Vietnam changes month to month, I would have to say. When I first got there, I had this sort of patriotic feeling that my parents had, my family had from World War II, that I was going to be doing a just thing here in Southeast Asia, from keeping communism, the usual line that was going on at that time. As I was there on a month-to-month basis, I realized somebody's screwing up here. That there's something wrong. We keep retaking the same places over and over again. We keep losing people all the time and not being replaced. There was, even as a 20-year-old kid, I could see that there's something wrong with this, the way this is being conducted. The guys who are running this show are not paying attention, or they're just not pulling the strings correctly. It changed me forever. It changed me in very drastic ways. I think as a kid, I was a very quiet kid, tall, skinny kid from Rockaway Beach. I didn't say much. I was kind of shy. I came from a strict home, and when I came back from that war, I had been changed completely. Even photographs of me, I looked like a different guy when I came back from that war. Combat did things to me that I was very much in touch with. I kind of knew exactly what it had done, and it wasn't all bad. For a kid like me, for a shy kid like me, it didn't turn me into a maniac. It turned me into somebody who had a little more confidence. You know, you learn a lot about yourself in combat. You find out who you are. You find out your faults. And you find out a lot of strong points about yourself, about your personality. These things come out. You can't hide them in combat. Everything in combat is raw. Every emotion comes out. You can't get out from doing responsibilities that you're supposed to be doing. You can't hide, I guess is the term. And you learn that, you learn what you're made of, is probably the best way to put it. I think it was, I'm retired from the New York City Fire Department, which requires very similar leadership to combat. And I think the leadership that I saw in Vietnam from the officers that I had when I was there, I think that stayed with me. The experiences stay with you, and you make comparisons to new experiences that you have. But I think what really affects you the most is the leadership that you witnessed from the people you were with, the sacrifices they were willing to make to demonstrate their leadership to us and for us. I tried to copy that as a lieutenant in the New York City Fire Department by showing the type of leadership that I learned. And I would actually consciously reflect back on these captains and lieutenants that I had in Vietnam. Really affected me a great deal. I didn't speak about this till I was about 42 years old. We never spoke about Vietnam, even amongst Vietnam veterans that I happened to work with in my job. We spoke about the job or other things, or guys may talk about being in the Army in general, but we never got into the day-to-day combat stories until after I was well in my 40s. The war itself really wasn't publicized much. It was generalized. I saw newspaper articles from back in those years, and there wasn't much, little tiny articles in the paper back in the 4th or 5th page of the paper until the Tet Offensive of 1968, and that really captured the press, the public started to figure out what was going on. And even then, what they were looking at was fighting that was going on in the big cities in areas where there hadn't been fighting before. So no one really knew that we were doing this kind of stuff every day. Up where I was, it was that fighting. So I think it's important now for people to know what went on there, what sacrifices were made, particularly about the fellows that didn't make it home. I think the most important thing has been touched on in the last couple of wars that went on in the Middle East, and that is that don't get in if you can't get out. That's political. The big one for me is don't blame the warrior. You know, we were young kids. We're going to get sent to where we're going to go where we're sent, and we're going to do our job. And when we came home, we were sort of blamed for the politics of the war along with everybody else. And a great deal of politicians in Washington, D.C. did a step backward and let us remain out there in the front and take the hit for what went on in Vietnam. When we were really just young guys, we all didn't look like Rambo. You know, we were just a bunch of young kids. We came home and we were changed forever. This Agent Orange was a real thing. For people who think it's, you know, what is this Agent Orange stuff? Are they making this up as they go along? When we were out in the bush, in the jungle or in the hinterland, we'd actually see these planes flying over and dropping this stuff. We didn't know what it was, but it used to make the foliage turn brown and shrink, and it would be in our food. If we opened up a can of food, you know, we didn't sit down at a dining table every night. We stopped and we got under a tree and we opened up a can of chow and we ate, and this stuff was dripping down on our food, and lo and behold, it's dioxin, which anybody who knows chemistry knows that dioxin can't be unmade. It's in there, and it's causing all types of problems in Vietnam veterans' health, and it affected my health to a large degree. Post-traumatic stress to me was some phrase that was used by guys. I really didn't know what it was, what it meant. I kind of had an idea, but it looked like it was, to me, it looked like it may be some kind of an excuse of some type. I don't mean to be cynical, but that's how it looked to me. Now, I have a son who's in the Marine Corps. He's been in the Marine Corps 16 years, and he is an EOD. That's the explosive ordnance disposal guys. And those are the guys that take the bombs apart. And they have a pretty tough job. And in Afghanistan, in a gunfight, he was wounded pretty bad, sent home, and he had quite horrible experiences in Afghanistan and Iraq. He served in Iraq also. And when he came home, the Marine Corps has a policy today that they didn't have back in the 60s, and they call it deflating. And deflating means that you come back, and for a couple of weeks before you get turned loose on the streets of your old neighborhood, you got to spend time with doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists and so forth to sort of deflate you, let the bad air out, I guess. And he was talking, and he was talking about his experiences, and they kind of suggested that he had some serious PTSD. And he called me up on the phone that night, and he says, you know, they've determined that I have PTSD, Pop. He says, but I think you ought to see somebody at the VA about it. I said, why? He says, you have the worst PTSD I've ever seen. He became an expert at PTSD, obviously. You know, he's an expert at something else now. But he said, I told my psychiatrist that my pop has the worst PTSD I ever saw. So I waited a couple of months. I kind of got a laugh out of that. But I did. I went to see a psychiatrist about it at the VA, and the psychiatrist listened to my stories, my combat stories, which I go in detail with. He knew my outfit, and he agreed. And it is a real thing, when they especially when they discuss your past after returning from Vietnam, some of the things you do. My involvement with alcohol was horrible. I don't like to brag about it. That's not bragging, but I don't mind talking about it if it's going to help somebody else. I had a very bad temper. So these things were manifestations of PTSD. As I said, when I first went in the Marine Corps, I was a very shy kid. All of a sudden now I've got a horrible temper. I'm swinging my fists around and I'm drinking like a sailor. And these were all parts of PTSD. But my son was the one who got me involved. I went to Hawaii, when I got R&R, I went to Hawaii. And that was kind of a sad story as well. I had a friend who was a Hawaiian guy. His name was Sisifo Falafini. And he was not a good gambler. I used to win all his money. He was married and had kids, and he said, you know, where are you going on R&R? And I said, I'm not really sure. Now, R&R was a week off or 2 weeks off that you got to go different places in the Pacific to visit and deflate, supposedly deflate. Some guys came back more inflated than deflated. But he said, why don't you go and stay with my family in Hawaii? I said, okay, great. He set it all up. He wrote to them. He said, my buddy Mac is coming to Hawaii on R&R. He's getting R&R. He'll be there, and, you know, make sure he has a room made up for him and everything's going to be fine. Well, 2 or 3 days before I was to leave on R&R, we were on a patrol in the mountains west of Quang Tri Air Base, and he stepped on a 155 millimeter artillery mine, and it blew him to pieces, and he was killed. And that bothered me more than I could say. I went on R&R anyway because you can't tell the Marine Corps you're not going here or you're not going there. I went on R&R, and I couldn't stay with his family, but they did come to meet me, and they offered for me to stay with them, and his body hadn't even been shipped home yet, and I was on R&R visiting them, and they were just the most decent, wonderful people I had ever met, and how they tried to put on a happy face for me because they knew that when I left them, I'd be going back. So my R&R was really not that happy an experience. I think the sacrifice that people made that didn't come home were largely forgotten until the Vietnam Wall was erected. And I was very happy to see that. I'm very happy to see on television how it's the most visited site in Washington, D.C. Every time I see that, I get affected emotionally, even now as I'm speaking. I think about all these lines and lines of people visiting that, and I'm so happy to see that. I'm so happy to see that people are not attaching themselves or detaching themselves politically from what these guys did, these 58,000 guys did on that wall. And I'm kind of proud of my nation, the people in my country, for doing that. For when they go to Washington, D.C., that's what they want to see. They want to see that wall. They want to see those names that were sort of hidden all these years. And I'm really happy that that's there. Jack McCormick, a good friend of mine, one of my best friends, was with me in Paris Island. He was also in the 4th Marines in Vietnam. And we sort of separated after leaving the Marine Corps. But he went in the fire department the same as I did. He went a few years before me. But we met up again in Brooklyn in the 70s, I believe it was, or 1980. I forget the year. But he was a captain, and he was what they call bouncing through, whereas a new officer in a rank, you have to work in different places. And he was working a night in rescue too, and we were real happy to see each other. And we had quite a busy night. We had a very eventful night, a lot of fires, some rescues made, and we stayed friendly after that. There was another fellow named Joe Giannini. Now, Joe Giannini was my lieutenant in Vietnam. He was a boss. He's a couple of years older than me, and he was in charge of the platoon. And I ran into him through Jack. Jack had some legal matters that were taken care of by Joe, and he happened to mention that he knew me, and we all three got together again, and now we're pals again.